The water beneath her feet groaned like a dying animal, and Lily Emerson knew with absolute certainty that she would die alone on this frozen river if the ice gave way before anyone discovered her stranded here. It was February 1883, and the Montana Territory had experienced the coldest winter in living memory. Lily had been foolish, desperately foolish, to attempt crossing the frozen expanse of the Yellowstone River alone. She had left the small settlement of Cedar Springs that morning with provisions meant for the isolated cabin where her elderly aunt lived on the far side. The journey should have taken no more than 3 hours on horseback, but halfway across the ice, her mare had panicked at the sound of cracking beneath them, reared violently, and bolted back toward the shore, leaving Lily stranded in the middle of the frozen river with nothing but the canvas sack of supplies that had tumbled from the saddle. That had been over 4 hours ago. The sun was descending rapidly toward the western horizon now, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold that would have been beautiful under any other circumstances. But Lily could only think about the cold seeping through her boots, about the spider web patterns of cracks radiating from where she stood, about the terrible certainty that any movement in any direction might send her plunging through the ice into the frigid water below. She had tried calling for help until her voice grew hoarse, but the settlement was too far behind her now, and the wilderness ahead offered no comfort. The wind carried away her cries like smoke. Her fingers had gone numb inside her wool gloves an hour ago, and her teeth chattered so violently she had bitten her tongue twice. The ice groaned again, a sound like the earth splitting open, and Lily felt her heart hammering against her ribs. She closed her eyes and prayed, though she was not certain anyone was listening. Her parents had died of influenza when she was 16, and she had come west 2 years ago to live with her Aunt Margaret, the only family she had left in this world. At 20 years old, she had thought herself capable and independent, had believed that life on the frontier would forge her into someone stronger. But standing here now, alone and terrified as darkness approached, she felt like a child again. Then she heard it. The sound of hoofbeats, muffled by snow but unmistakable. Lily's eyes flew open, and she turned her head as carefully as she could manage, terrified that even this small movement would be too much for the fragile ice. In the distance, perhaps 100 yards away on the same shore she had departed from that morning, she saw a rider approaching. Her heart leaped with desperate hope. "Help!" she cried out, her voice cracking. "Please help me!" The rider pulled his horse to a stop at the river's edge. Even from this distance, she could make out the broad-brimmed hat, the heavy coat, the confident way he sat in the saddle that marked him as someone who had spent most of his life on horseback. He was studying the situation, she realized, assessing the danger. "Do not move," he called out, his voice carrying clearly across the frozen expanse. "Stay exactly where you are," as if she had any other choice. Lily watched as the man dismounted and began walking along the shoreline, examining the ice from different angles. The light was fading fast now, and she could feel panic rising in her throat. What if he decided it was too dangerous? What if he left her here to freeze? But then he was moving, stepping out onto the ice with the kind of careful deliberation that suggested he knew exactly what he was doing. He tested each step before committing his full weight, and she noticed he was carrying a length of rope coiled over one shoulder. The ice groaned under his weight as well, but he did not hesitate. "My name is Ethan Nash," he called out as he advanced slowly toward her. "I am going to get you off this river, but you need to stay calm and do exactly as I say. Can you do that?" "Yes," Lily managed to say, though her whole body was shaking now, whether from cold or fear or relief she could not tell. Ethan moved with practiced precision, And as he drew closer, Lily could see his face more clearly. He appeared to be in his mid-20s, with dark hair visible beneath his hat and a strong jaw covered in several days' worth of stubble. His eyes, even in the failing light, were intensely focused on the ice around them both. "The ice is thinnest where you are standing," he said when he had gotten within 20 feet of her. He stopped there, seeming to sense that coming closer might be catastrophic for them both. "I am going to throw you this rope. When you catch it, tie it around your waist. Do you know how to tie a bowline knot?" Lily shook her head, afraid that even speaking might somehow make things worse. "All right. Any knot will do as long as it is secure. Once you have the rope around your waist, I need you to move toward me very slowly. Slide your feet, do not lift them. Distribute your weight as much as you can. Understand?" "I understand," Lily said. Ethan uncoiled the rope and threw one end toward her. It fell short by several feet, landing on the ice between them. "You need to reach for it," he said. "Move slowly." Lily took a breath and forced herself to move. Each sliding step felt like an eternity, and the ice protested beneath her with sounds that made her stomach clench. But she reached the rope and picked it up with her numb fingers. Tying it around her waist proved challenging with hands that barely wanted to function, but eventually she managed something that looked reasonably secure. "Good," Ethan said, and there was something reassuring in his voice, something calm and steady that made her believe they might actually survive this. "Now come toward me, slowly. If you feel the ice starting to give way, tell me immediately." Lily began to move, each sliding step an act of faith. The ice continued its terrible groaning, and twice she felt it shift beneath her feet in a way that made her gasp aloud. But Ethan kept talking to her, his voice steady and encouraging, and she kept moving toward him. When she was finally close enough, he reached out and grasped her forearm, his grip strong and sure even through the layers of clothing. "I have you," he said. "Keep moving." Together they made their way back toward the shore, and with each step Lily felt the tension in her body ratchet higher. They were going to make it. They were actually going to make it. But then, when they were perhaps 30 feet from safety, there was a sound like a gunshot, and Lily felt the ice drop beneath her feet. She did not even have time to scream before she plunged into water so cold. It drove all the air from her lungs. The current seized her immediately, trying to pull her under the ice, but the rope around her waist went taut, and she felt herself being hauled backward. Her head broke the surface and she gasped, her entire body convulsing with the shock of the cold. Ethan was pulling her toward him with powerful, steady heaves on the rope, and then his hands were under her arms, and he was dragging her up onto more solid ice. He did not stop moving, pulling her across the ice toward the shore even as water streamed from her clothing and instantly began to freeze. When they reached solid ground, Lily collapsed onto the snow-covered earth, her body shaking so violently she could not control it. Ethan was already shrugging out of his heavy coat and wrapping it around her, then lifting her as though she weighed nothing at all. "My horse," he said, carrying her toward the patient gelding that waited nearby. "We need to get you warm immediately or you will die." He lifted her into the saddle and climbed up behind her, wrapping his arms around her to hold her in place. Lily was barely conscious of the movement as he spurred the horse into a gallop, heading not back toward Cedar Springs but in a different direction entirely. "Where?" she tried to say, but her jaw would not cooperate. "My ranch is closer," Ethan said, his voice close to her ear. 10 minutes ride. You would never make it back to town." Lily could not argue. She could barely think. The cold was like a living thing now, burrowing into her bones, and she found herself leaning back against Ethan's solid warmth, desperately seeking any relief from the terrible shaking that possessed her body. The ride seemed to take both seconds and hours simultaneously. When they finally stopped, Lily looked up through half-frozen eyelashes to see a ranch house, modest but well-built, with smoke rising from the chimney. Ethan dismounted and pulled her down after him, carrying her toward the door. He kicked it open and brought her inside, where blessed warmth hit her like a physical force. "We need to get you out of these wet clothes," Ethan said, setting her down near the fireplace. "Right now. Do not argue with me. You will die of exposure if we do not get you warm." Lily nodded, her fingers fumbling uselessly at the buttons of her coat. The wet fabric had frozen stiff, and her hands would not obey her. Ethan did not hesitate. He began unfastening the buttons himself, working quickly and efficiently, his face set in determined concentration. There was nothing improper in his manner, only the focused urgency of someone who understood exactly how close to death she was. He stripped off her coat and began working on her dress, then seemed to think better of it. "Can you stand?" he asked. Lily tried and found her legs would barely support her. Ethan disappeared into another room and returned with what looked like men's clothing, a thick wool shirt and trousers. "I am going to turn around," he said. "Get out of those wet things and put these on. I do not care about modesty right now. Your life depends on getting warm." He turned his back, and Lily fumbled with her dress with fingers that felt like wooden sticks. It took far too long, but eventually she managed to strip off the wet layers and pull on the dry clothes Ethan had provided. They were far too large for her, but they were warm and dry, and that was all that mattered. "I am done," she managed to say. Ethan turned back around and immediately wrapped her in a thick quilt, then guided her to a chair positioned near the fireplace. He draped another blanket around her shoulders and began building up the fire. "Your boots," he said. "Your feet." Lily's boots had been made of good leather, but they had been soaked through when she went into the water. Ethan knelt before her and began unlacing them, his movements careful but quick. When he pulled off her boots and stockings, Lily saw that her feet were an alarming shade of white. Ethan's jaw tightened. "This is not good," he said. He disappeared again and returned with a basin of water. "This will hurt," he warned her. "The water is only lukewarm, but it will feel like fire." He was right. When he placed her feet in the water, the pain was so intense that Lily cried out. Ethan gripped her shoulders gently. "I know," he said. "I know it hurts, but your feet are frostbitten. We need to warm them slowly, or you could lose your toes." Lily bit her lip and nodded, tears streaming down her face from the pain. Ethan kept his hand on her shoulder, a steady presence, and gradually the agony began to fade to a more bearable throbbing ache. Sensation was returning to her feet, and while it hurt terribly, she understood that this was a good sign. "Thank you," she whispered. "You saved my life." Ethan looked up at her, and for the first time since he had found her on the ice, some of the tension seemed to leave his face. "You are welcome," he said. "Though I hope you will not make a habit of wandering out onto frozen rivers." Despite everything, Lily found herself almost laughing. "I was trying to reach my aunt," she explained. "She lives on the far side of the river and she is not in good health. I thought the ice would hold." "The ice has been unpredictable this winter," Ethan said. "Warm days followed by cold nights. It makes for dangerous conditions." He studied her face. "You are from Cedar Springs." "Yes, I am Lily Emerson. I have been living there with my aunt for 2 years now." "Ethan Nash," he said, though he had already told her his name out on the ice. "I run cattle on the land north of the river. I do not get into town much." "Then it was very fortunate that you came by when you did," Lily said. "I had given up hope." Ethan's expression grew serious. "I was checking fence lines when I heard you calling. If I had been even a quarter-mile further away, I would not have heard you." He paused. "You were very lucky." Lily thought about how close she had come to drowning, to freezing, to dying alone out there on the ice. "Yes," she said softly. "I was." Ethan checked the water in the basin and seemed satisfied with what he saw. Her feet had regained some of their normal color, though they still ached fiercely. He lifted them from the water and dried them carefully with a towel, his touch surprisingly gentle for such rough hands. Then he wrapped them in more blankets. "You should stay here tonight," he said. "It is too dangerous to try to get you back to town in the dark, and you need rest. I have a spare bedroom you can use." Lily knew she should probably protest, knew that staying alone overnight in a bachelor's home was scandalous, but she simply did not have the energy to care. Besides, Ethan Nash had saved her life at considerable risk to his own. She trusted him. "Thank you," she said. "I am very grateful." Ethan nodded and stood. "Are you hungry? I was about to make supper when I heard you calling." Lily realized she was ravenous. She had not eaten since a hasty breakfast before dawn. "Yes, actually, I am starving." "Good," Ethan said. "That is a good sign." He moved to the kitchen area, which was open to the main room, and began preparing food. Lily watched him work, noting the efficient way he moved, the sureness of his hands. He was clearly a man accustomed to doing for himself. Within 20 minutes, he had produced a simple but hearty meal of fried salt pork, beans, and cornbread. They ate mostly in silence, but it was not an uncomfortable silence. Lily was too exhausted and too focused on the blessed warmth of the food in her belly to make conversation. But she found herself studying Ethan when she thought he was not looking. He had a strong profile, and there was something solid and dependable in the way he carried himself. She guessed he was perhaps 25 or 26 years old. When they had finished eating, Ethan cleared away the dishes and showed her to the spare bedroom. It was small but clean, with a narrow bed covered in quilts and a washstand in the corner. "There is water in the pitcher," he said. "More blankets in the chest if you need them. My room is just through that wall, so call out if you need anything." "Thank you," Lily said, "for everything. I do not know how I can ever repay you." Ethan looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "You do not owe me anything," he said finally. "I would have done the same for anyone." But there was something in his eyes, something that made Lily's heart beat just a little faster. She told herself it was merely gratitude, merely the natural response to someone who had saved her life. But as Ethan bid her good night and closed the door, she found herself thinking about the strength in his arms as he had carried her, the gentleness of his hands tending to her frozen feet, the steadiness of his voice when she had been certain she would die. She crawled into the bed, still wrapped in the oversized clothes he had lent her, and pulled the quilts up to her chin. Her body ached in 1,000 places, and she knew she would be sore for days. But she was alive. She was warm and safe and alive, and it was all because of Ethan Nash. Lily closed her eyes and fell almost instantly into a deep, dreamless sleep. She woke to the smell of coffee and the pale light of early morning filtering through the window. For a moment she was disoriented, unable to remember where she was, but then the events of the previous day came flooding back. She sat up carefully, testing her body. Everything hurt, but it was the good kind of hurt, the kind that meant she was healing rather than dying. Her feet were sore but functional when she swung them to the floor. She stood slowly and made her way to the washstand, splashing cold water on her face. Her dress from yesterday was hanging over a chair, and when she touched it, she found it was dry. Ethan must have hung it by the fire after she had gone to bed. She changed out of his borrowed clothes and back into her dress, which was wrinkled but wearable. When she emerged from the bedroom, she found Ethan standing at the stove, cooking breakfast. He turned when he heard her and nodded. "Good morning," he said. "How are you feeling?" "Sore," Lily admitted. "But much better than I have any right to feel. Thank you again for everything." "Sit down," Ethan said, gesturing to the table. "You should eat before we head back to town." Lily sat and accepted the plate of eggs and bacon he offered her. They ate together in the morning light, and Lily found herself noticing details about the house that had escaped her attention the night before. It was a bachelor's home, certainly, but it was well kept and clean. There were books on a shelf near the fireplace, and the furniture, while simple, was well made and sturdy. "Have you been ranching here long?" she asked. "5 years," Ethan said. "I came out from Missouri after my father died. He left me a small inheritance, enough to buy the land and start a herd." He took a sip of his coffee. "It has not been easy, but I have managed to make it work." "Do you run the ranch alone?" "Mostly. I hire a few hands during spring roundup and branding season, but the rest of the year it is just me." He paused. "It can be lonely sometimes, but I prefer it to working for someone else." Lily understood that sentiment. She had come west seeking independence as well, though her circumstances had been different. "I work at the general store in Cedar Springs," she said. "Mrs. Patterson hired me when I first arrived. The pay is not much, but it gives me something to do besides sit in my aunt's cabin all day." "Your aunt," Ethan said. "The one you were trying to reach yesterday. You said she is not in good health." Lily nodded. "She is 72 and has rheumatism badly. I try to bring her supplies every week, but with the cold weather, I have not been able to visit as often as I should." She looked down at her plate. "She will be worried about me. I should have arrived yesterday afternoon." "We will get word to her," Ethan promised. "As soon as we reach town, you can send someone to let her know you are safe." After breakfast, Ethan saddled his horse while Lily gathered the few belongings she had with her. The canvas sack of supplies she had been carrying was gone, lost somewhere on the ice or swept away by the current. She would need to replace everything and try again to reach her aunt. The ride back to Cedar Springs took almost an hour. Lily sat in front of Ethan in the saddle, acutely aware of his arms around her as he held the reins. It was an intimate position, and she found herself thinking about how improper this all was, how scandalized the townspeople would be if they knew she had spent the night at Ethan Nash's ranch. But she could not bring herself to care over much. Let them gossip if they wanted. She was alive, and that was what mattered. As they approached the town, Lily could see people moving about their morning business. Cedar Springs was a small settlement, barely 200 souls, perched on the southern bank of the Yellowstone River. There was a general store, a blacksmith, a saloon, a church, and perhaps 20 other buildings scattered along the single main street. Lily had grown fond of the place over the past 2 years, despite its isolation and harsh winters. Ethan rode directly to the general store and dismounted, then helped Lily down. Several people had stopped to stare, and Lily could see the questions forming on their faces. But before anyone could speak, Mrs. Patterson emerged from the store, her face etched with worry. "Lily Emerson," she exclaimed. "Lord have mercy, child, where have you been? When you did not come back yesterday, I feared the worst." "I am sorry, Mrs. Patterson," Lily said. "I had an accident on the ice. Mr. Nash here rescued me." Mrs. Patterson looked at Ethan with new respect. "Then we owe you a great debt, sir. Lily is like a daughter to me." Ethan touched the brim of his hat. "I only did what anyone would have done, madam." But Mrs. Patterson was already ushering Lily into the store, clucking over her like a concerned hen. Lily looked back over her shoulder at Ethan, wanting to say more, wanting to thank him again, but he was already mounting his horse. Their eyes met for just a moment, and Lily felt that strange flutter in her chest again. Then he was turning his horse and riding back out of town, heading north toward his ranch. For the rest of that day, Lily found herself replaying everything that had happened, every word Ethan had spoken, every touch of his hands. She told herself she was being foolish, that she was merely grateful to the man who had saved her life. But when she closed her eyes that night in her own bed above the general store, it was Ethan's face she saw, Ethan's voice she heard. The days that followed fell into their usual pattern. Lily worked at the store, helping Mrs. Patterson with customers and managing inventory. She wrote a letter to her aunt explaining what had happened and promising to visit as soon as the weather improved and the ice was safe again. But her thoughts kept returning to Ethan Nash and his lonely ranch north of the river. It was nearly a week later when Ethan appeared in town again. Lily was restocking shelves when she heard the bell above the door chime and turned to see him stepping inside. Her heart gave an unexpected leap. "Mr. Nash," she said, trying to keep her voice steady, "this is a pleasant surprise." Ethan removed his hat and nodded to her. "Miss Emerson, I am glad to see you looking well." "Thanks entirely to you," Lily said. She gestured around the store. "Is there something I can help you with?" "I need supplies," Ethan said. "Flour, coffee, salt, a few other things." Lily helped him gather what he needed, and they fell into easy conversation as she tallied up his purchases. She learned that he had spent the past week mending fences and preparing for spring calving season. He asked after her feet, which had healed completely with no lasting damage. The conversation was mundane, ordinary, but Lily found herself savoring every moment of it. When Ethan paid for his supplies and prepared to leave, he hesitated at the door. "Miss Emerson," he said, "if you are still planning to visit your aunt across the river, perhaps you would allow me to escort you. The ice will not be safe for much longer, but I know a route that is more reliable." Lily's heart raced. "That is very kind of you, Mr. Nash. I would be grateful for the escort." They arranged to meet the following Sunday after church. Lily spent the intervening days in a state of nervous anticipation that she did not fully understand. She told herself it was merely practical, merely sensible to accept Ethan's offer of protection. But she could not deny the excitement she felt at the prospect of seeing him again. Sunday dawned clear and cold. Lily attended the morning service at the small church, barely hearing a word of the sermon. When she emerged afterward, she found Ethan waiting with 2 horses, one of them a gentle mare that he explained he had borrowed from a neighboring rancher. They set out together, and Ethan led them to a different crossing point than the one Lily had attempted before. Here the river was slightly narrower and the current less strong. The ice was indeed thinner than it had been the previous week, but Ethan tested it carefully before allowing them to proceed. They crossed without incident, and Lily felt a surge of relief when they reached the far shore. Her aunt's cabin was another hour's ride through the forest, and they made good time on the hard, packed snow. When they arrived, Aunt Margaret greeted them with tears of joy and relief. "Lily, my dear child," she said, embracing her niece, "I was so worried when I received your letter. Thank the Lord you are safe." Lily introduced Ethan, and her aunt insisted he stay for lunch. They spent several hours at the cabin, during which Lily chopped wood for her aunt's fire, and Ethan repaired a broken shutter that had been flapping in the wind. Aunt Margaret watched them both with shrewd eyes, and when Ethan stepped outside for a moment, she pulled Lily aside. "That young man is sweet on you," she said quietly. Lily felt her cheeks flush. "Aunt Margaret, do not be ridiculous. He barely knows me. I have lived 72 years, child. I know what I see." Her aunt squeezed her hand. "He is a good man, I can tell. You could do much worse." Lily did not know what to say to that, so she said nothing. But her aunt's words echoed in her mind as they made the return journey that afternoon. Did Ethan have feelings for her? Or was her aunt simply seeing what she wanted to see? As they reached the river crossing again, Ethan pulled his horse to a stop. "The ice is deteriorating fast," he said. "This may be the last time it is safe to cross until spring thaw is complete and the ferry can operate again. If you need to visit your aunt again before then, you will need to take the long route around." Lily nodded, but her heart sank at the thought. The long route meant a full day's travel each way, impossible to manage while working at the store. "I could check on her for you," Ethan offered. "My ranch is not far from her cabin. I could ride over every week or so, make sure she has everything she needs." Lily looked at him, surprised by the generosity of the offer. "That is very kind, Mr. Nash, but I could not ask you to do that. You are not asking, I am offering." Ethan's expression was serious. "Your aunt should not be alone out there if she is unwell, and you should not have to worry about her." "Why would you do this for us?" Lily asked softly. "You barely know us." Ethan was quiet for a long moment. "Perhaps I would like to know you better," he said finally, his eyes meeting hers. Lily's breath caught in her throat. There was no mistaking his meaning now. She thought about her aunt's words, about the way her heart sped up whenever she saw Ethan, about how safe she had felt in his arms during that terrifying night on the ice. "I would like that as well," she said. They crossed the river together in the fading afternoon light, and when they reached the Cedar Springs side, Ethan helped her dismount. His hands lingered on her waist for just a moment longer than necessary, and Lily found she did not want him to let go. "I will visit your aunt this week," Ethan said, "and I will come to town next Sunday. Perhaps you would have lunch with me." "I would like that very much," Lily said. She watched him ride away, and when she turned back toward town, she found Mrs. Patterson standing in the doorway of the store with a knowing smile on her face. "Well," the older woman said, "that is an interesting development." Lily could not help but smile. "Yes," she said, "I suppose it is." The weeks that followed were the happiest Lily had known since coming to Montana. Ethan was true to his word, visiting her aunt regularly and bringing Lily detailed reports of the old woman's health and spirits. He came to town every Sunday without fail, and they began spending hours together, walking along the river bank in the spring sunshine, sharing meals at the boarding house, talking about everything and nothing. Lily learned that Ethan had grown up on a farm in Missouri, that his mother had died when he was young, that his father had been a hard man who had taught him the value of hard work, but little about showing affection. She told him about her own parents, about how much she missed them, about her dreams of building a life on the frontier. With each passing week, Lily found herself falling deeper in love with Ethan Nash. It was in the way he listened when she spoke, truly listened, as though her words were the most important thing in the world. It was in the gentle strength of his hands, hands that could rope a steer or build a fence, but could also touch her with such tenderness it made her heart ache. It was in his smile, rare but radiant when it appeared. But weeks turned into a month, and then 2 months, and while Ethan was attentive and kind, he had not spoken of love, had not indicated where their relationship was heading. Lily began to worry that perhaps she had misread his intentions, that perhaps he saw her merely as a friend. It was late April when everything changed. The snow had finally melted, revealing brown earth and the first tentative shoots of spring grass. The river was running high and fast with snowmelt, completely impassable now, except by the ferry that had resumed operations the previous week. Ethan had invited Lily to visit his ranch, and she had accepted eagerly, riding out with him on a Saturday afternoon when Mrs. Patterson had given her time off. The land was beautiful in its wild, untamed way, and Lily could see why Ethan loved it. He showed her around the property with obvious pride, pointing out the new calves that had been born that spring, the fence lines he had extended, his plans for the future. They ended up sitting on the porch of his house as the sun began to set, watching the play of light across the distant mountains. Lily felt utterly content, more at peace than she had been in years. "Lily," Ethan said suddenly, his voice serious, "there is something I need to say to you." Lily's heart began to race. "What is it?" Ethan turned to face her, and the look in his eyes took her breath away. "That day on the ice when I found you out there alone and terrified, something happened to me. I cannot explain it, but from that moment forward I have not been able to stop thinking about you." "Ethan," Lily whispered. "Let me finish," he said. "I know I am not much. I am just a rancher trying to scratch out a living on this hard land. I do not have much to offer you, but I love you, Lily. I have loved you since the moment you looked at me with those brave eyes and trusted me to save you, and I want to spend the rest of my life making you happy if you will let me." Tears were streaming down Lily's face now. "Yes," she said. "Yes, Ethan, I love you too. I have loved you for weeks now." Ethan reached out and cupped her face in his hands, his touch infinitely gentle. "May I kiss you?" he asked. "Please," Lily said. When his lips met hers, it was like coming home. The kiss was soft and sweet and full of promise, and when they finally pulled apart, Lily was smiling through her tears. "Marry me," Ethan said. "I know it is fast, I know we have not known each other long, but I am certain of this. Marry me, Lily." "Yes," Lily said again, laughing now with pure joy. "Yes, I will marry you." They were wed 6 weeks later in the small church in Cedar Springs, with Aunt Margaret in attendance despite her rheumatism, and most of the town turning out to witness the ceremony. Lily wore a simple dress of white muslin that Mrs. Patterson had helped her sew, and Ethan wore a new suit that made him look impossibly handsome. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife and Ethan kissed her in front of everyone, Lily felt as though her heart would burst from happiness. They spent their wedding night at the ranch, and Lily discovered that the passion between them was as strong as the love. Ethan was gentle and patient, and Lily felt treasured in a way she had never experienced before. When she woke the next morning in his arms, she knew with absolute certainty that she had made the right choice. The first year of their marriage was not without challenges. The ranch demanded long hours and hard work, and Lily threw herself into learning everything she could about ranching life. She helped with the cattle, learned to cook on the wood stove, tended a vegetable garden, and made the simple house into a warm and welcoming home. They visited Aunt Margaret together every few weeks, and the old woman delighted in their obvious happiness. "I knew it," she would say, cackling with satisfaction. "I knew that boy was meant for you." As summer turned to fall and fall to winter, Lily discovered she was with child. She told Ethan one evening in December as they sat by the fire, and his face lit up with such joy that she fell in love with him all over again. "A baby," he said, placing his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "Our baby." Their son was born in late June of 1884, a healthy boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes. They named him James, after Ethan's father, but gave him the middle name of Thomas after Lily's father. Holding her son for the first time, Lily thought about that terrifying day on the frozen river, about how close she had come to dying, about how one man's courage had saved her life and led her to this moment. "Thank you," she whispered to Ethan as he sat beside her bed, gazing down at their son with wonder. "For what?" he asked. "For crossing the ice," she said. "For saying come with me, for everything." Ethan kissed her forehead gently. "I would cross 1,000 frozen rivers for you," he said. "I would do anything for you, Lily. You and our son. You are my whole world." The years that followed were full and rich. James grew into a sturdy, adventurous boy who loved following his father around the ranch. 2 years after James was born, Lily gave birth to twin daughters, Emma and Rose, who kept the household in constant motion with their energy and laughter. The ranch prospered under Ethan's careful management and Lily's support. They expanded the herd, built a larger barn, and eventually added several rooms to the house to accommodate their growing family. Aunt Margaret lived to see all three of her great nieces and nephews born before she passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 77. Lily mourned her, but she was grateful that her aunt had known such joy in her final years. Cedar Springs grew as well, evolving from a small settlement into a proper town with a school, a doctor, and even a hotel. Lily and Ethan became pillars of the community, known for their generosity and their willingness to help neighbors in need. Ethan never forgot how close Lily had come to death on the ice, and he made it his mission to ensure that no one else would face such danger alone. He organized a winter rescue team and taught others the techniques for ice rescue that had saved Lily's life. On their 10th anniversary, Ethan surprised Lily with a trip to the spot on the river where they had first met. It was summer now, and the river ran swift and blue beneath a cloudless sky. They stood on the bank, holding hands, and looked out at the water that had nearly claimed Lily's life but had instead brought them together. "You ever think about that day?" Ethan asked. "Every day," Lily said, "but not with fear anymore. Now when I think about it, all I feel is gratitude. Grateful that you heard me calling. Grateful that you were brave enough to come out onto the ice. Grateful for every moment we have had together since then." Ethan pulled her into his arms. "I almost did not hear you," he said quietly. "I was checking the north fence line and I almost rode in a different direction that day. If I had been even a few minutes later." "But you were not," Lily said, reaching up to touch his face. "You were exactly where you needed to be, exactly when you needed to be there." "That is not luck, Ethan. That is fate." They stood there together in the summer sunshine, two people who had found each other against all odds, bound together by love and by the memory of a frozen river and a moment of courage that had changed both their lives forever. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, they walked back to their horses hand in hand. In the distance, they could see the smoke rising from their ranch house, where their children were waiting with the woman they had hired to watch them for the day. It was a good life, a life full of love and purpose and joy. Lily thought about the girl she had been, 20 years old and stranded on the ice, certain she was going to die. She thought about how terrified she had been, how alone. And then she thought about the man who had appeared through the falling snow, who had risked his own life to save hers, who had crossed the ice and said, "Come with me." She had come with him, and in doing so she had found everything she had ever wanted. She had found home. She had found love. She had found her future. The years continued to unfold in their beautiful, ordinary way. James grew tall and strong, eventually taking over much of the ranch work from his aging father. The twins grew into lovely young women, Emma inheriting her mother's practical nature, and Rose her father's quiet strength. They attracted suitors from all over the territory, but neither was in any hurry to marry, both determined to choose partners who would love them as deeply as their parents loved each other. Ethan's hair turned silver at the temples, and Lily developed the lines around her eyes that came from years of smiling. But the love between them never dimmed. They still held hands when they walked, still stole kisses when they thought no one was looking, still found wonder and joy in each other's presence. On their 25th anniversary, their children threw them a celebration at the ranch. Half the town turned out for the party, and there was dancing and music, and so much food that the tables groaned under the weight of it all. As Lily danced with Ethan under the stars, she felt herself transported back to that night after their wedding, when they had danced together for the first time as husband and wife. "Happy?" Ethan asked, his arms around her waist. "So happy," Lily said. "How could I be anything else?" Their oldest friends and neighbors came to toast them, telling stories about the legendary romance that had begun on the frozen river. The tale had grown over the years, becoming part of the mythology of Cedar Springs, told and retold until it had taken on the quality of a fairy tale. But for Lily and Ethan, the truth was simpler and more profound than any story. They had found each other when they needed each other most, and they had built a life together through hard work, devotion, and unwavering love. In their later years, when the ranch had been passed down to James and they had moved into a smaller house in town, Lily and Ethan would sit on their porch in the evenings and watch the world go by. They spoke less than they had in their youth, but they did not need words anymore. A lifetime together had taught them to communicate in glances, in touches, in the comfortable silence of two souls who knew each other completely. Ethan died first, on a crisp autumn morning when he was 72 years old. He went peacefully in his sleep, and Lily woke to find him beside her, his face relaxed and calm, his hand still holding hers. She did not cry at first. Instead, she sat with him for a long time, memorizing his face, remembering everything they had shared. "Thank you," she whispered to him, just as she had on the night their first child was born. "Thank you for crossing the ice. Thank you for saving me. Thank you for loving me." The funeral was the largest Cedar Springs had ever seen. Ethan had been respected and loved by everyone who knew him, and people came from all over Montana Territory to pay their respects. Lily stood beside his grave surrounded by her children and grandchildren, and she thought about how one act of courage had created all of this legacy of love and family and community. She lived 3 more years without him, years that were both painful and beautiful. She missed Ethan every day, missed his presence and his voice and his touch. But she was not truly alone. Her children visited often, bringing her grandchildren to brighten her days. And in her quiet moments, she could feel Ethan still with her, a warm presence that had never truly left. On a winter morning in February, almost exactly 45 years after the day she had been trapped on the frozen river, Lily woke with a strange sense of peace. She rose from bed and went to the window, looking out at the snow-covered landscape. The river in the distance was frozen solid, just as it had been on that long-ago day. Lily dressed carefully and made herself breakfast, moving slowly but with purpose. She wrote letters to each of her children, telling them how much she loved them, how proud she was of them, how grateful she was for the lives they had built. She wrote about their father, about the man who had saved her life and given her everything she had ever dreamed of. When she was done, she lay down on her bed and closed her eyes. In her mind, she was young again, standing on the ice in terror, and then she saw him coming through the snow, her Ethan, strong and brave and sure. She heard his voice calling to her across the frozen expanse. "Come with me," he said, reaching out his hand. And this time, with a smile on her face, Emerson Nash took his hand and went with him, crossing over to whatever lay beyond, certain that wherever Ethan was, that was where she belonged. Her children found her the next morning, peaceful in death, a faint smile still on her lips. They mourned her, but they also celebrated her, knowing that she had lived a full and beautiful life. They buried her beside Ethan in the cemetery on the hill overlooking the river, and they carved on her headstone the words that had begun it all. "Come with me," it read. And below that, "She did and found love eternal." The story of Lily and Ethan became part of the history of Cedar Springs, passed down through generations. Their descendants thrived in Montana, carrying forward the legacy of courage and love that had begun with one man's decision to cross a frozen river to save a woman he had never met. The ranch remained in the family for over 100 years, and though much about the world changed, the story remained the same. It was a story about how a single moment of bravery can change everything, about how love can bloom even in the harshest conditions, about how two souls can find each other against impossible odds and build something lasting and true. It was a story about crossing the frozen river, about taking the hand that is offered, about saying yes to love even when it is terrifying. And it was a story with a happy ending because Lily and Ethan had found each other, had loved each other, had built a life together that was rich with meaning and joy. They had faced hardship and loss, as everyone does, but they had faced it together, and that had made all the difference. On winter evenings, when the river froze solid and the snow fell thick and fast, people in Cedar Springs would tell the story to their children and grandchildren. They would speak of the girl trapped on the ice and the cowboy who saved her. They would talk about the courage it took to cross that frozen expanse, the faith it took to reach out a hand to a stranger. And they would end the story the same way every time, with the words that had started it all, the words that had changed two lives and created a love that lasted beyond death itself. "Come with me," the cowboy said to the girl on the ice. And she did, and they lived happily ever after. The tale continued to inspire people long after Lily and Ethan were gone. Young couples would visit their graves on the hill, holding hands and making promises to each other about building the kind of love that could weather any storm. The river below continued its eternal flow, freezing in winter and rushing free in spring, a constant reminder of the power of nature and the courage of the human heart. James Nash, their son, lived to be 83 years old and never tired of telling his parents' story. He would gather his own grandchildren on his lap and tell them about the day his father crossed the frozen river to save his mother, about how that one act of heroism had led to a lifetime of devotion. He made sure they understood that true love was not just about grand gestures, but about the everyday choice to show up, to be present, to care for each other through good times and bad. Emma and Rose each married good men who treated them with the respect and tenderness they had learned to expect from watching their parents. They passed down their mother's wisdom and their father's strength to their own children, creating branches of the family tree that spread throughout Montana and beyond. The ranch itself became a landmark, known throughout the region as the Nash Place, where the famous love story had unfolded. People would sometimes ride out just to see it, to stand on the porch where Ethan had proposed, to look out at the land that he and Lily had built together. The current owners, descendants of James, welcomed visitors and shared stories, keeping the memory alive. In town, the general store where Lily had worked was eventually replaced by a larger building, but a plaque was mounted on the spot where the original store had stood, commemorating Lily Emerson and her role in Cedar Springs history. The church where she and Ethan had married still stood, though it had been expanded and renovated several times over the decades. Couples still chose to marry there, drawn by the romance of the place. The river crossing where Ethan had found Lily was marked with a simple stone monument placed there by the town council 50 years after the rescue. It bore a simple inscription: "Here, love conquered fear. Here, courage changed two lives forever. Here, a cowboy crossed the ice to save the woman who would become his wife." February 1883. Every year on the anniversary of the rescue, people would gather at the monument to remember. They would tell the story again, keeping it alive for new generations. And sometimes, on very cold winter nights when the ice was thick and the stars were bright. People swore they could see two figures walking hand in hand across the frozen river, forever young, forever in love. But the real legacy of Lily and Ethan was not in monuments or plaques or stories told around winter fires. Their true legacy lived in the hearts of their descendants, in the values they had instilled, in the example they had set. They had shown that love was worth fighting for, worth risking everything for, worth building a whole life around. They had proven that two people who started with nothing but courage and devotion could create something beautiful and lasting. Their great-great-grandchildren would sometimes find the letters that Lily had written in her final days, carefully preserved by the family. In them, she spoke of gratitude, of joy, of a life well lived. She wrote about the moment on the ice when she had thought all was lost, and then Ethan had appeared like an answer to prayer. She wrote about how that moment had taught her that sometimes salvation comes in unexpected forms, that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with the scariest moments. "I was alone on the ice," she had written in one letter. "I was certain I would die there, cold and afraid, but then he came. My Ethan crossed that river even though it might have killed him. He took my hand and said, 'Come with me,' and I trusted him. That trust was the beginning of everything. That moment was when my real life began." In another letter, written to her twin daughters, she had offered advice about love. "Do not settle for anything less than what your father and I had," she wrote. "Do not accept a love that is half-hearted or uncertain. Wait for the person who will cross the frozen river for you, who will risk everything to keep you safe, who will choose you every single day for the rest of their life. That person exists, and they are worth waiting for." The family cherished these letters, treating them as precious heirlooms. They were read at weddings and anniversaries, shared during difficult times when someone needed to remember that true love was real and possible. They served as a reminder that the best things in life often come from the hardest moments, that courage and love are forever intertwined. As the 19th century gave way to the 20th, and then the 20th gave way to the 21st, the world changed in ways that Lily and Ethan could never have imagined. The frontier was settled. Montana became a state. Technology transformed daily life, but some things remained constant. People still fell in love. They still faced fears and overcame obstacles. They still needed courage to take chances on each other. And in Cedar Springs, now a thriving small city, people still told the story of the girl on the ice and the cowboy who saved her. It had become mythology, yes, but it was mythology rooted in truth. It had really happened. Lily and Ethan had really lived and loved and built something extraordinary from one moment of desperate need and heroic action. The frozen river had trapped her alone, making her face what she thought was certain death. But the cowboy had crossed the ice, had reached her when no one else could, had said those transformative words, "Come with me." And in coming with him, in trusting him, in choosing him, Lily had found not just rescue but redemption, not just safety but purpose, not just survival but joy. Their story reminded people that life could turn on a single moment, that one decision could change everything, that love was always worth the risk. It reminded them that happy endings were real, that courage was rewarded, that faith in another person could lead to miracles. And so the story lived on, generation after generation, a testament to the power of love and the enduring strength of the human spirit. Lily and Ethan Nash had crossed the frozen river together, and in doing so, they had created something that would never melt, never fade, never be forgotten. They had created a love story for the ages, one that would continue to inspire and comfort people for as long as stories were told. The frozen river had been an obstacle, a danger, a moment of crisis. But it had also been a beginning, a test, a crucible from which something pure and true had emerged. Ethan had crossed it to save Lily, and in saving her, he had saved himself, had found the purpose and partnership he had been seeking without even knowing it. Lily had trusted him across that ice, and that trust had been repaid 1,000 times over in the years that followed. Their happily ever after had not been perfect. They had faced hardships and sorrows, struggles and setbacks. But they had faced them together, hand in hand, and that had made all the difference. They had built a life of meaning and love, had raised children and contributed to their community, had created a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. And in the end, that is what any of us can hope for: to love and be loved, to face our fears with courage, to build something lasting with the person who crosses the ice for us. Lily and Ethan had done that. They had lived their happily ever after, not just in spite of the frozen river, but because of it. Their story was complete, their ending was happy, and their love was eternal. And that truly was all that mattered.